What up, old Uncle 2? Back with you once again with another weekly outlook. We've had quite a bit of interesting price action in Bitcoin and silver, and the S&P has sort of done what it does. So I want to focus this week primarily on Bitcoin and just focus on that, get that message out. Maybe we'll touch on silver just a hair. The S&P, like I said last week, we were looking for a 3/C opportunity to the upside. It's set up perfectly. We got a very nice C. I notified the members, hey, if you were in on this C from the outlook, it has been resolved. It is not a 3. And this was before we broke structure. Now we've broken structure. And as I outlined last week, I would now expect that it's likely we test the low of the range. Maybe it gets more triangular within here. But at the very least, the breakout to the upside and new all-time highs is delayed. So let's focus in on Bitcoin. All right, looking at Bitcoin, just in case you were unaware, this is the count that we've been tracking for quite some time. And last week, we drew out that this was the very expectation. So maybe you're a little fearful, maybe you're a little scared, which you shouldn't be, but you certainly shouldn't be caught off guard. And we'll go ahead and run that back real quick. So that tells me that we have simply completed the one of this final actionary leg. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something along those lines. Okay, so you see that there should be no surprises here. However, we'll dig in deeper and see where we are within that potentially final actionary leg. But before we do, I wanted to zoom out and talk about the larger structure once again, because I know that those Elliott Wave enthusiasts among us are going to see this and they're going to think that there's something weird or off. But I want to make very clear that that is not the case. However, we're using a little known Elliott Wave himself theory that has been buried by EWI and should not have been. And I want to circle back to where I talked about that in a previous video, if I'm not too lazy, but it's called the irregular top. And it was when this irregular top was playing out, I highlighted of the potentials of what it should be and where things should wind up. But if a certain circumstance happens, which is a break below regular support, then what I would expect is that it was an expanded irregular top. So we won't get into the details of exactly how the specifics of an irregular top are formed and what they mean. We'll save that for the Discord. However, just know that this was on the radar even then. While it's not normal expectation, hence the name irregular. So while this is a very strange looking pattern for a W, X with an expansion for a very expanded flat wave C. I'm sorry, well, it should be a WXY. I called it ABC, but WXY for very expanded final motive. Final actionary structure that is not motive, but it sort of takes the very same shape and purpose of a C wave in a flat. But basically, we can sort of lean in to this being that wave because of this expansion on the 3-wave high that can very well start a long retracement and maybe even it goes beyond this expectation. I don't think so. That's very possible, but you need to shoot for each signpost before you go for the next, right? So the first opportunity in this scenario for it to be over, and it's a probable opportunity, is in this area. Could it get deeper? All kinds of FUD and things that you see, sure. But if we zoom out further, there's a reason that that's the area that we've been expecting. We can throw on the VPVR, let that kick in. We are inside of that low volume area where we rejected off previously and found support recently. And I expect to do the same again. I don't expect we will hang out here for too awful long, few days before we start to move to the upside. Now, there are super bearish alternatives where the irregular top could still be in play. I think it's silly to go down that route now, and that would then take you back into falling into this zone. But again, we need to get through this particular level before that becomes an area of primary concern. The primary concern is that we could be putting in a very near-term, long-term low, okay? So that's what we need to focus on. So let's zoom in, lock in, and get back to this lower degree. So we'll simply outline that this is, we drew it, we mocked it up at the polyline last week. I went ahead, you know, your boy hates putting the labels on because I really only do it for you guys. I see them in my head. For most people, they make less mistakes when they have more labels. I make more because I'm just not used to it. And I might share the wrong count because I put something in the wrong area, as I did with silver this morning. So if we go back to log, I like this better for log, just the way that we're moving. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So this could be potentially still in the 3 of the 3, but we'll just map that there. What we see is 1, 2, take this to line just to help us out. 2, 3, 4. This is clearly a single wave. So possibly 1, 2. Yeah, it could possibly give us, and these things like to get lower than you would typically expect. We in line here, we are already making a new low. I would think typically that we would bounce at this level to come up for a 4. But I would not put it beyond this chart from the 3 extending. And Kai, I know that that's not what you want. Probably did some knife catching if I had to guess based on your interest in the Discord. But I'm sorry, my man, the 3 could be not yet done. When it does resolve, we'll be looking for all of the normal signage that we see. We don't have the, okay, we back, got the indicators all set up. Let's go. All right, so what we're going to be looking for to even resolve this 3 wave is that we're not on the higher time frames, but on the lower time frames, we're going to need to see some price divergence where we're going to get a lower low on the price and a higher low on the oscillator. That doesn't appear to have happened so far, but it does look like it could potentially be setting up. So unfortunately, Kai, like I said, maybe this 3 will come down further. When that does resolve, this will probably be a good target for this degrees wave 4 and then a wave 5, something like that. This RSI is setting up very nicely on the 1 hour that it will create a nice divergence and a nice bounce. And again, you know, when this wave resolves, it then becomes, I have it drawn in the, actually this is gonna have to be out here, down further, maybe down sub 70 potentially. We'll just draw this out again. Okay, actually this would be quite perfect, and then we would have to do something like this as a rough guide. Okay, so yeah, maybe we break down below 70, possibly. Needs to be on the radar if we zoom back out. But then remember, when this resolves, look at all these degrees that have stacked up, right? All these degrees will have stacked up, and then we'll have a equal, you know, even if we're wrong on 2 of these degrees, we still have an opposite move to these 2, right? So we should see a nice move at the resolution. So we don't have to be too concerned about the minute details. And we shouldn't, you know, depending on what your plans are, maybe it's time to zoom out and not play the super low degree because we're so close to the edge, potential edge of a big turning point, right? So maybe you can play a little more macro, and then once a new direction has been established, if it does happen, you can play small again in that direction, or if that trend continues, you can begin to play small in that direction. Zooming back out briefly, if we look again at these macro levels, this does break down into this next zone through that low volume node we talked about, but to the top of this one, and then hopefully bounces. Well, maybe we are headed for this VPVR. Just based on internal projections, it does look like we're going to get through this and catch the meat of this next volume node. Now that we look at it, which, it sucks, but what is your, if you're short-term long on high leverage, you might get liquidated. But if you're on the long play, the long game, you should be okay. So again, should not be surprising. Hopefully you've positioned yourself appropriately based on these updates that we've been giving every week. And it's just been following along. Of course, there were always opportunities for our ideas to change. However, they've been sort of tracking along nicely for the last few months. So no reason to reverse course now. And be assured that the second that this does not become the most probable outcome, in my view, I will be sure to alert everyone, as I always do. But because no one's perfect and things do change. But this has been tracking nicely, so do not ignore it. All right, boys. That's it for Bitcoin this week. Let's briefly talk silver. Yeah, fun story about silver this week. Those of you who have been following me for a while may or may not know that I'm an avid hodler of not just crypto, but silver and gold, both paper and physical. And I've offloaded physical silver a couple times on the way up. Personally trying to not get rid of silver, but get less silver and potentially balance that to gold and other things. And I made tried to make another physical sale this week, and it's been nuts. I tried to sell on Wednesday. I think the price they were giving on Wednesday was $114. They wouldn't let me in the shop. They said you have to have an appointment. To their credit, they did have a sign on the door, but the next available appointment was on Saturday. So Saturday rolls around, and it was after this 30-some% drop in one day, and the price they were paying was far less than $114. Pretty disappointing. Your boy still sold some, but not as much as he was intending. And that's my fun with physical silver this week. And that's always when you get into these metals and things are going crazy, you should know that it's going to be harder to move them. Unfortunately, it doesn't always go great. But I'm, having been a long-term holder of this, I've always, sort of layered in, layered out. I got in mostly, pretty much 17 to 20 range, but back then that was a bigger range because price was pretty more compact, and had ideas on exits. And the next exit was always with a 7 in front of it. I just didn't get to exit when it had that 7, so did it later. All right, so I haven't sort of been watching, or let's say parsing this small parabolic price action. And typically when you see this 34% drop, quick like that, it could be a signal. This is what we would call in the Wyckoff land a bearish change of character. So what will happen here is that we should enter into some sort of a distribution range, and maybe my count is off and this 3 is here. I don't think that it would be this 5 would be here. I don't think so. But very well could be this 3. And then in this chart, you have to be careful because we can't get back on this particular one. The last big rally we saw with the Hunt brothers sort of ended up it looking almost like a 1-2 huge 3 and not much of an impulse finishing out. So we got to always be careful of that. But if we just parse this small count out, I would say this 3 pretty much off the table. So we should still have within this overall structure one more big move no matter what. And it looks to me like we might have a couple. So right now we've had this change of character, and we either continue on for one more high, and this is still going to be a change of character that will set up a range to this range, that this Wyckoff reaccumulation zone for this wave 4, or distribution. We'll have to check that out with the Wyckoff as we get into the range that is sure to come. But first, I think that we can finish our selling climax at this high before we begin that range. But right now, we should, in the near term, focus that we should go retest this high around 120, maybe not quite as high, maybe a little higher, before we come back down and test that low of, I don't know, 75 or so that we just did one more time. Either way you slice it, I think that there's the potential for us to be wrong. Is not that this is over completely, just that maybe this 5 would go here, which would put this 3 here instead of the degree that is shown. All right, guys, that's the outlook for this week. Silver, not done yet. Bitcoin, nearing its end, also not done. Two opposite ends of the spectrum. Likely, while silver is finishing up its near-term bull run, that before it has a blow off and cool off for some time, few months, maybe even a year, who knows, for this larger wave 4. While that's finishing up and when this begins to cool off, that's when we would expect Bitcoin to potentially be finishing its move to the downside. They may not line up exact time to time. I have a strong inclination that there will be a rotation from silver and gold over to the cryptosphere, and that's when we will see this bottom start to come in. All right, boys, that's it for the outlook this week. Weakness in Bitcoin, strength in the outlook for this week in silver, but it should remain range bound for a little bit of time before one more high. All right, boys, 2 out.